Hello, Ilya. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Ilya, we met, although you did have to remind me, which I feel incredibly embarrassed about, in Bristol, funnily enough, even though it turns out
Yeah.
we're geographically quite close, at NFT BRS, where I think I was speaking on a panel with Blocktunes, which I was very pleased to do so. And we spoke about your project, which fascinates me greatly, but I want to come on to that a little bit later. If you could perhaps give people an intro to yourself first, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I am a very typical mirror image of the typical story of a musician. So I did a maths degree, and instead of carrying on to do something sensible, I became a musician. Uh, pretty much towards the end of
You
the degree.
idiot.
Although, could you imagine if it had been the other way around? I'd be on some boring podcast talking about elliptic curves and. So yeah, I got into singing while doing a maths degree, and pretty much since finishing uni, I've been working in an intersection of like all my biggest interests, which were like, again, maths, music, and tech. Pretty much straight away started working in music tech startups, and very soon after started building them with my co-founder, who is my dad, Roman.
All right. Can you give us a little
Yeah.
bit of a background on the startups you worked on with before?
Yeah, so pretty much everything was to do with sheet music, curating sheet music, organizing, displaying sheet music. The first thing we actually built with Roman together was a little kind of web app for writing unmetered choral music,
Right.
which is this
Wow.
very awkward niche that exists, but is really, really difficult to do with all the software that's around, like Sibelius, Finale. It was just something very difficult to do. And this is how we got into just building music tech in the first place. We thought it was going to be a very simple 3-month long project.
Okay.
We were very wrong.
Yeah, unmetered. That sounds really complicated. To me, anyway. I'm assuming
Well,
it was.
I mean, so this was in the world of Orthodox Christian choral music, which is the kind of music I've been doing as a singer. So there we have like these hymns whose lines have very different numbers of syllables, and we fit those very long lines to these extensible chant melodies. So if you were to, and bar lines are an absolute must because we need to know that this phrase is ended.
Yes.
And what used to happen was we'd have these bars where one's 17/4, the other one's 22/4,
Wow. Okay.
with no like logic behind it at all. And the issue wasn't so much writing these things. I mean, that took forever. But the really big issue was editing. If you needed to put a note in the middle of one of these bars, just the way that the technology that existed at the time worked, you couldn't do it. It's not like Microsoft Word where you can just put your cursor right in the middle and just carry on writing the words.
God, that sounds like an absolute nightmare. How
Oh,
did
yeah.
it turn out in the end?
Well, we built it. So we achieved our kind of main purpose, which was, can we actually go from the idea stage, things written on a napkin in a pub, to actually building a product and getting somebody to pay a little bit of money for it. We did that. It wasn't a huge amount of money, so I had to carry on being a singer.
Wow, that's incredible. So that kind of, I suppose, does lead us quite nicely into the project you're working on right now. I feel incredibly privileged to be in what was the closed beta. I'm not sure if it is closed anymore, but of Oh, it still is. Oh, well, in that case, I feel incredibly privileged.
And it's going way more closed very, very soon. So it's actually, we were very sort of, it's closed, but you can invite your friends and that kind of thing. But very, very soon, it's going to be like, if you're an OG, you're an OG. That's it.
I'm proud to say I'm an OG. But Polymuse, your latest project, as far as I'm aware, tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so for the last sort of 10, 11 months, we've been working on using all the tech that we've developed over the last 2 years to build a generative music engine. So, I mean, what the whole company Delphos is about is creating an operating system for building music tech. So any kind of app that you want to build, so that you don't have to go through the nightmare that Roman and I went through building that Orthodox app. You could just do it very quickly. And we realized very soon after that, using that to build generative music would be like an incredible use of the technology. And we were really, really inspired by everything people were doing with generative artworks, and just seeing the empowerment that it was giving to end users. We realized, okay, yeah, we really need to start building generative music.
I want to pick up on that point quickly, actually, because generative artworks, I mean, we have seen, if we leave aside sort of AI art like Mid-Journey and Stable Diffusion and things like that, and think more about the generative stuff that many of us will be familiar with, even sort of non-Web3ites, so like the Bored Apes, for example, which, as far as I'm aware, is literally just a bunch of assets that fit together. That has even come into music. So, for example, people like Genzo and Winebags, for example, they've used the async blueprint where they have already created a number of stems which can then just be bundled up. Same with block tunes, for example. They even came up with their own tech to do it, where they've already got stems which, if jumbled up together, can just create new songs based on these stems. But Polymuse doesn't quite work like that, as far as I'm aware, does it? It's quite different. You want to tell me a bit more about how, well, maybe not how it works, I don't know how much you can give away, but how does it compare to the generative stuff that I've just discussed?
Yeah, so it actually composes every single part of the track. So from the structure of the piece, like the form, to the chord progression, to the bass line, to accompanying things, to the melody, everything gets actually composed. It does not exist in any form before it's run. So what you get every single time is something genuinely very new. And the more complex you get, the more statistically unlikely it is that you will get something that's a repeat. In fact, like, I've listened to like many thousands of generations with like very, very similar inputs, and you get musical ideas repeated, but not actual compositions, which is a huge, huge, huge thing when you're talking about generating in bulk. I mean, there's a lot of like copyright concerns that it led us down like a whole rabbit hole for the last sort of maybe 4 months of like really thinking about how do you create a generative system where having thousands and thousands of these generations, possibly millions, like really mass volume generations, how do you make sure they're different from each other, both in a musical sense and in a legal sense?
Can you talk a bit more about the legal sense? I mean, what was your thinking? Are you saying you're trying hard not to replicate, say, a popular song, or at least anybody else's song at all?
Yeah, so Polymuse knows a lot of music theory. and it knows a lot of concepts, and it can be taught a lot of concepts. But we're being really, really careful as to where these concepts come from. So,
okay, yes.
if you're, for example, kind of like if we look at the stuff going on around Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, they've trained it on a lot of artworks that belong to somebody.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they're making, products and eventually money without any kind of possible mechanism of cutting in the original artists. Now, the way that a lot of those kind of machine learning models are so complicated that it's actually, where did that bit come from? It's very, very difficult to track and say, that thing really looks like my artwork style. It's impossible to prove that. Yeah, that's where it happened. Our kind of motivation was a little bit simpler. We were like, okay, this is way too complicated for us. No, everyone at Delphos is just like a music or tech nerd. Like, we're very badly equipped to really think about this. So what we did was we made Polymuse not need a lot of data to actually do the things it does.
Clever.
And the motivation for that was we could have copyright provenance. So we actually did like a really, really cool project on this recently with DJ Dance Club, which is a really cool Web3 project. I think you've heard some of the music that's come out of that.
I certainly have. I'd love to get onto that later. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. But
the idea is, and I'm quoting this one purely because it's the more complex, the most complex thing we've done copyright-wise so far. So we've got the tech from Delphos, Polymuse. Michael from DJ Dance Club has come in with all of his like learning materials, like all the musical resources, his sound design, loads of like, bits of MIDI, that kind of thing. And we smash those things together. And then when Polymuse is run in the kind of DJ Dance Club sound world, when it runs, it's inputless. So we don't actually have it say like, okay, go look at this YouTube video or this file from Spotify, and then using the knowledge that you have, create a track. It doesn't have that. There is no input. It doesn't understand anything in some ways. Yeah. And this is amazing because the only people who could lay any kind of claim to, oh, I could potentially own this output in as much as my current legal jurisdiction allows me to, that set is only Michael and Delphos.
Yeah. Yes.
And, if some people like to talk about the AI owning it, kind of like the monkey who took the photo, that whole thing, that's it. And what this means is nobody else can in the future say, hey, that's kind of sounds like my music, or like that's copied my thing, because it genuinely didn't.
Yeah.
I
really, really like that because, that kind of sort of ticks two boxes for me because, one, it avoids so many issues, which we may or may not see with programs like Midjourney. I think there's an argument to be made, but hopefully that argument can't be made in relation to Polymuse. And at the same time, you are coming, the program does end up coming up with these genuinely unique pieces of music, like you say, that might have recurring themes and bits and pieces, but at the end of the day, it is a composition of its own right, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And certainly I had a lot of fun with it because you have a base of what you call sound worlds, I believe.
Yeah.
So I think when I joined, there were probably 5 or 6, and certainly the most prominent were, I think, stride, jazz. Was there a bebop one? I can't remember now.
Yeah, there were, yeah.
Yeah. So how has this, again, as much as you can tell me, how has the sound worlds aspect worked? I'll leave this to you because I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, so a sound world is basically fancy way of saying it, a configuration for Polymuse. So, this thing that this way of making melodies, do it in this way.
Okay.
How you do accompaniments, do it in that way. It's kind of like how a composer who's been trained can listen to another style and like understand what's going on, what makes that style.
Okay.
And attempt to replicate it.
Nice.
Now, this kind of DNA, musical DNA, comes from the person doing the configuration, because we've now had several experiences. So the real genius behind loads and loads of Polymuse is our head of music, Angus. He's he's just an absolute beast with this stuff. So we've done this experiment several times where I make a sound world, I configure it, I code it, I use the different modules within Polymuse for making it, and then he goes and makes the same thing with a same specification, and the outputs sound very different. Invariably, his one is much better. There's no kind of variation with that. But that's when I was like, that this is something really, really exciting, because if we have this whole world of musicians who need to get music out there, and they want to get lots of music out there, they want lots of work, they want their music in lots of different places. If they can pass on their kind of musical DNA to an automated tool, like a robot kind of helper, that just streams out thousands and thousands of these truly original tracks, and the copyright thing is completely like, they can close that loop. I think that would be like a really fantastic product. So you were asking about sound worlds. I think I'll sort of explain more about that. So within this configuration, you set it up to output music in the style that you want it to output in. You can make that as varied or unvaried as you like, because sometimes you actually want it to output pretty much the same track, but with slightly different variations of it. So like the simplest one you could imagine would be like Ravel's Bolero, where the two variables that you have are the instruments playing and how long it is. And literally, that makes sense to anybody. You could have like 2 hours of Ravel's Bolero. That's like my personal idea of hell. But you know exactly what to expect, and it works exactly the way you wanted it to. And we specifically wanted, even though that sounds like a very unscalable thing to be doing and working on, it was really, really important to us to do that, because sometimes it's very unnerving when there's a lot of control given over of a creative process to an AI, and you can't actually say, no, I want that exact thing.
Yeah.
And for this to be really valuable to musicians, because musicians are probably even way more particular than artists. I can't think of a single composer who would do like a Bob Ross type thing, like you just put a little tree there and like, it wasn't exactly perfect, but that's fine, because that's what nature's like. Composers will be fuming at the mouth. What do you mean there's an F sharp there? Get out.
So in that respect, actually, how can you see this being used? I mean, as far as I see these sorts of things, once a product is out there, it's going to be used as people want to use it. And it will be fascinating to see what sorts of use cases come out of it when it is public. But for the time being, in your head and what Delphos has spoken about, how can you see Polymuse being used? I mean, is there sort of more of a corporate aspect to it? So, if a company needs some background music for their adverts, or are you looking for musicians to incorporate it into their own compositions, or in fact, like you said earlier, just create thousands of compositions based on their own input? What sort of things beyond that can you see it being used for?
Yeah, so the focus is definitely going to be on utilizing massive quantities of music in places where, ultimately it's bought. So businesses in particular. So, for example, somebody is building a video game, and they don't want to have like short 2 or 3 minute long tracks be on repeat as players like explore an area or play a particular game. When especially if it's a repetitive game and somebody's seen the same graphics several times and then the same audio is playing, their brain gets tricked into thinking I've already done this. Yeah. And it becomes so much easier to like leave the game, quit, and just not return to it. It's uneconomical for a game to have hundreds of hours of music in this thing, and then pay musicians like to actually sit there and do this thing. What I think would be incredibly cool is somebody setting up a sound world and having that be used in the game, where it outputs infinite controlled but infinite high quality music for that game, because that actually opens up so many opportunities both for musicians. They don't have to go around like to super expensive conferences that are coming up like literally right now that a lot of people are refusing to go to now. Which it'll be completely nameless for now. To hunt down like game studios to be like include my music in this thing.
Yeah.
But they can literally put their soundtrack up in an asset store and say, hey, do you want my sound world in your game? That's a really cool thing that musicians formerly couldn't do. But on the flip side of that, and just talking about gaming for now, imagine if John Williams made a sound world.
Yep.
And you're making like an epic kind of Skyrim-y type game, and you can have John Williams actually literally score thing. And because it's not like some fully random thing, like this was configured and crafted by John Williams. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, I'm very excited. I mean, although going back slightly, you were saying about having this constantly shifting music because, of course, you're doing the same thing all the time. So you need something that is changing in order to keep you intrigued, interested. And maybe one of the things that it brings to mind is, for example, Nobuo Uematsu, Final Fantasy very famous Final Fantasy composer and various other things. I spent hours on those games humming the themes, singing the themes, because they were repetitive and because they meant something to me, because it tied in with the game. Often, games are supposed to be their own experience to everybody, but essentially most people end up having a very similar experience, and you have this music which is connected to a very specific point in the game, and it gives it that emotional attachment, and a lot of that has to do with a theme. Is there a way perhaps where you could still have that in your game world, so you do have constantly generative music, but there's always a hook, something you can latch onto?
100%. Music that's completely totally random, again, like it kind of throws you off. So that's actually an issue that we have with some of our sound worlds, where we haven't implemented kind of recurring theme. The only thing holding it together is like a chord progression that does repeat. So you do feel like, I've gone through a chorus, I've gone through another chorus. Because if you don't have something that holds it together, it's like, oh.
Yep.
No, absolutely, that's something that's possible.
Actually, in that respect, I'm wondering if now might be a good time, if you're able, to show us a little demo of Polymuse, because certainly the chord progression thing, I've done a little bit of music. I grew up in a choir, but when it comes to chords, like I know where the notes go up and down, but it's been fascinating watching some people use it, and make sure that it's putting out particular chord progression that they want it to do. So if you're able, is it something you could demo for us now?
Oh, absolutely. Let me get Polymuse up here. And I'll screen share. There we go. So, shall I start off with just some chords?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, well, start as basic as you like, because, a lot of people won't have seen this at all.
Yeah.
So for anybody, I suppose if you could also, because this will be going out as audio podcast as well, if you could also explain what it is you're inputting.
Absolutely. Thanks. All right. So let's, this would actually be a good way of talking about really what a sound world is. So let's start with stride, because it's all played on a piano. There's no instrumentational variation or stylistic. So let's just do that. So we've integrated Polymuse into Discord, literally, so we don't have to build a front end for it. And then also for the beta, so that people could actually play around with it and discuss in the same place. Here I am with the Polymuse bot in DM setting, but this can also work in an actual Discord where everyone can see what I'm typing. And I'm just going, I have a command, which is !gen, and then I type in a text prompt to it. So for example, I'm going to type in stride, and it's going to think a little bit, and hopefully very soon give me a file that I can play.
Yeah, from memory, it's usually about, less than a minute for these things to... There we go. It's done. There we go. That's incredible.
Yeah. So here we go. Please be good. So there you had like a stride jazz piano piece, completely composed. None of this existed before we sent that request through.
Incredible.
But what we can do is say gen stride, and then give it a few more variables. Like let's make it faster. Let's make it 180 BPM, and then let's make it minor. Okay. So the chord progression it will generate will be in a minor key. It will think a little bit, and then should return. The stride piano world has a very simple rendering solution, so it renders quite quickly. The stuff we've done with DJ and Dance Club has much higher quality audio production, so it takes a little bit longer, but that's because of the rendering, not the actual composition. The composition with Polymuse is actually very, very fast. Okay. Something to consider if we do like a DAW plugin in the future. But here's stride at 180 BPM minor. That kind of thing.
Amazing.
Now, within each sound world, we actually have different musical elements that make up the sound world. So we can actually split it up into, melody, chords, bass, drums, whatever it is. In stride, because it's a piano solo thing, we have a left-hand part and a right-hand part. So if we did something similar, so stride left hand, so that'll be the accompaniment, 180 BPM minor, we should only get the left hand, the accompanying part.
Okay.
And I think that'll be a good way of showing the chord progression thing in a sec.
So what are the parameters for left hand? I mean, is it sort of everything up to middle C, or?
No, it's just whatever it composes as that musical element. So the musical elements, in a way, they stack on top of each other, but they do that in an intelligent way, so they inform each other. So they've been trained to be able to be like, you're doing that kind of thing there. Let me respond to it. It's like crazy stuff. Like that bit I am taking zero responsibility for. That's all Angus. It's incredible. Yeah. Should we listen to stride left hand?
Please. mean, whoever's playing that at 180 BPM, hats off to them.
I think, yeah, that'll be the top. I think that's the really unspoken topic is, will virtual instruments take our jobs? Not will AI take our jobs?
Yeah.
I think everyone who works on VSTs, I think, has really, really sort of got away scot-free from that particular thing. But yeah, so let's do straight left hand, 180 BPM, and then we'll give it a chord progression that we'll all recognize. So G, and I'm within this text prompt, I have like these little brackets that tells Polymuse like, oh, like really look at this thing. This gives you like certain playing parameters, because that's the really cool thing about Polymuse, because it understands the music theory aspect of each sound world very well. You can actually say to it, yeah, do it, but do this exact thing in it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So one example is I can give it a chord progression. So I say to it here, G semicolon, the piece will be in G major. And then I do chords, G, and then I put a little bar line, and then E minor, and then A minor, and then we'll finish with a D7 chord, because I'm that basic.
I mean, it's less basic than what I could achieve. Which is why I'm asking you to do it.
Okay, and let's listen to that.
There we go.
And it plays that thing on a loop, and you can really hear it go like, da, 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 all the way through it. But you can do that with kind of everything. So if we do like a pop sound world and we put the same chord progression in there, what would be a good tempo for pop? 130 maybe?
I'm leaving that one up to you.
Oh, I genuinely don't know this. I'm a Orthodox music and Baroque person. So it's like, I've been asked so many questions about like hip hop, and I'm just like, dude.
Brilliant.
It's like asking, the prime minister that we have right now how much like a pint of milk costs. Like, it's just, you're not going to get any kind of informed answer.
That was very cutting. So it's having to think about this one for a little bit longer. So the pop world, does that take longer to render than Stride?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes. But again, mostly because of audio rendering concerns rather than anything else. Mm-hmm. All right, let's get this one go. So you can hear that chord progression again.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I hate it, but wow. It's just so incredible what it can achieve.
So, why did you hate it?
Oh, it's not my cup of tea. Sorry.
No, I mean, knowing the music that you do, I feel you.
Yes, quite. That's why I had a lot of fun with the mucking around with the hip hop and techno. Is it techno that DJ Dance Club? Is that his sound world? Yeah.
So let's demo that a little bit as well, because let's actually do a techno again with this chord progression, just so that everything's like consistent. So I'm doing gen, techno, and then the chord progression, and then let's do 120 BPM for that one. That was one of the things that we discovered when we first ran this techno sound world, was because techno, even like broadly, it has certain BPM ranges that it's meant to do. But people are putting in like 80 BPM and just seeing what comes out.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really enjoying working around 108 because, I mean, I love things like Moombahton, for example, and obviously it's not going to replicate that because you need like a Dembo beat. But just that kind of the vibe that 108 brings, mixed with the techno sound, just was so, I don't know, it had a particular power to it, for example. So here, yeah, we can see the rendering is pretty heavy on this one. I think I remember when I was doing it, like it was taking up to a minute to. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So all right, let's listen to this. So by the way, so this is completely Michael from DJ and Dance Club working with Polymuse. So, and the one of the biggest emphases here was getting like as commercial a sound as possible out of it. So here we go. So this was actually run through like a proper synthesizer, proper VST. There was a lot of work that he put into making sure that the way everything came together sounded good.
Yeah.
That's why, you know, for me, this is quite a special sound world.
Yeah, that must be quite. I mean, what does that involve on Michael's end? Because, I mean, does he have to make sure that, you know, certain parts like the bass are only sort of acting within certain frequencies? Are there any issues with masking or anything like that?
You could rephrase that as an Orthodox music or a Baroque question.
So
lots of sound design, basically.
Yeah. It was just it was a conversation I had with people like Enzo when they were doing their stuff on Async, which I can mix well enough, but there are things that these guys know that it's well beyond me. And how I, for example, would be quite worried about using something like Async, even though it only uses stems, which are pre-rendered, because I wouldn't be able to know whether this kick drum is going to work within the same frequency of this bass and therefore cancel each other out, and it doesn't sound the way you want it to. How would you know, or how would Michael know, if you're able to answer this, that's not going to happen with a generative thing like this?
So I think in Michael's case, there was a lot of like planning. Like this wasn't something he made overnight, but there was a lot of, you know, specifically that kind of thing. So when you're building any kind of sound world, if you're doing any kind of aleatoric thing, or actually if you're building something with ASIC blueprints, or how a lot of other, because actually that way of, you know, as we're generating loads of pieces, is a deceptively powerful way of creating loads and loads of music. Just building, you know, 5 bass lines, 5 chords, whatever, and stacking them and mastering them. It kind of, when you're doing that, it teaches you how to think ahead. And there's a kind of slightly different music theory that kind of goes with it. It's actually, it really reminded, when I was planning some of this stuff, and this is just talking about the composition rather than the sound design, which might be what you were asking, actually.
Maybe.
All right, well, we'll cover both. So it's like when you're writing a round or a canon, you write a tune, and as you're writing that tune, you're thinking about when will the other parts come in to repeat this tune, and what chords will it form, and what happens in bar 37 if you have 5 of these voices coming in, or 6 voices. You know, what's the maximum number you can put in before the whole thing goes to crowd. And it's clearly, like, as you're hearing with this stuff, and as people have been doing with async and everything, it's very, very doable to think ahead like this. As we scale, what we're looking more and more into is actually automated ways of tracking this. Because the worst kind of user experience for a musician working with this could be, building and building loads and loads of configurations, doing loads of sound design, and then having like 2 and 10 generations just sound awful for no reason other than 2 elements not working together.
Yeah.
With Polymuse, it's a little bit easier to avoid that than it is with just stems on top of each other, because you can actually configure, just don't have these 2 musical elements happen at the same time. You have so much control over it that you can actually say things like that. One thing we did in a very early thing was I was building one of these jazz things, and I had to write like a separate function for this. I said every time it wants to generate like this kind of major chord and then a major chord that's 1 semitone down below it, don't do that. And because I needed that level of control, because that's personally was something I didn't want it to do. So you can it's a bit like a software patch where like if you catch it doing this, do this other thing. So that's something that is definitely possible. I personally don't like it. It's not a very good way of doing it. But yeah.
Yeah, wow. I mean, clearly the proof is in the pudding. I mean, I know you're working, day and night to improve this all the time, and you're adding sound worlds. I think techno was added not that long ago.
Yeah. But
yeah, I mean, I've certainly had a lot of fun. Every time I get a chance to sort of sit down and have a go, I will. And I love the stuff that's coming out with it.
With the sound worlds, you can actually also tell it. So if you use somebody else's sound world, you can generate certain parts of it. So for example, for techno, we could literally say to it, techno chords and drums. Because you can actually influence it even deeper, like on an instrumentation and kind of form level of what you want to get out of it. And I think that's something like having that level of control for whoever the end user is very powerful as well. And it's something that I think is fairly unique as far as these generative music algorithms go. So let's just quickly listen to this one and then So as you heard there, it was still consistent, BPM wise, chord progression wise, but it literally just did the arpeggiated chords and the drums, and it did not give a bass line. It did not give a melody. Yeah. And I'm just glad it responded very well and didn't let me down.
Yeah, so that could be incredibly useful in terms of composition. I mean, would you be able to in the future separate those elements further from the one chord? So instead of saying, giving Polymuse a prompt, I need techno drums, and then giving it another prompt, I need techno bass. This sounds like the start of some club hit in the making, actually. Could you tell it to give you techno drums and bass within the same file, and then you go, oh, I like those, but I wish I could separate those so that I could use them in my own thing? Is that going to be something that will be possible in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can give things that get generated, we can give them as audio, we can give them as audio stems, and then we can give them as MIDIs as well. And actually, sheet music, we've had several requests for actual sheet music from it as well.
Yeah.
Which very, very niche request, but it's definitely absolutely doable. Yeah.
I can imagine for the jazzier stuff as well. That's very cool. So how do you think Polymuse compares? Well, we've already spoken about other generative art projects like Midjourney. How do you think it compares to some of the other AI music tools that we've seen? I mean, I haven't been following many, but certainly one that caught most people's attention was Bard and Google Bard. And we saw some demos, or rather I should say heard some demos, where they did some kind of big bass drop techno whatever, which sounded very professional. It sounded like it had been composed and mixed by a professional. Do you have any knowledge of Bard? Do you know of any other AIs out there that... Where do you see sort of the AI realm in terms of music going ahead in the next few years?
So I think you mean Music LM. That was the name of the model, I think.
Maybe.
Bard was their version of GPT. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
That was... that was very interesting because Google's Music LM dropped the exact day the Polymuse beta went live. And I was, as is my one, driving back from Bristol. And something, I was using my phone was on Google Maps, but I saw like little notifications come from Discord. So when I stopped for lunch at a services, the first thing that came up was one of the beta testers just saying "rip Polymuse." So I had a great day that day. The audio quality is fantastic from Google's thing. So so the thing with a lot of these machine learning things that are going on right now is they're going from audio to audio. So because audio is abundant as data, and
well, it sounds like we're going to see some of the similar issues as to what we were saying earlier, where these things are trained on pre-existing compositions, basically.
Oh, the copyright issue. Well, that's the second thing. I mean, the first thing is a lot of people are doing audio to audio training. I'm actually really excited about that kind of thing, but I have huge reservations, and that's a big reason why we haven't done that at Polymuse with Polymuse. The way I see it, there's a lot that goes into creating a track. There's, the composition of it. There's the instrumentation. There's orchestration. Then there's the, producing the sound. Then there's like mastering and audio. When you're doing audio to audio, you are actually going straight for the last step of that, for the sound production and mastering of it.
Yeah.
And you're kind of hoping that through having loads and loads of data, you will somehow reverse engineer by some statistical method the rest of it.
Okay.
If there was as much music data out there, good music data and reliably labeled and everything, as much as there is text for something like GPT to train on, I see that being useful. As things are, I have very serious reservations about it being able to do everything, and in a way that provides the right thing to the right people, if that makes sense. Because people who are very into playing around with AI, which is a lot of people, it's millions and millions of people. That's perfect. They need like a jazzy kind of texture, so they want to like type in "I want jazz," and it will give them like a jazzy audio texture. That's fine. But when you're talking about like producing a track that's unique, that you can actually say, okay, I can own this, I can use this, I can do things with it. Because, potentially you can generate a piece and actually say, that's kind of what I want to go for, and you use it as an ideation kind of resource, and then actually go and write your own piece of music from it.
Yeah.
You do need to think about composition. You do need to think about instrumentation, orchestration, that kind of thing. And then the key, there aren't a lot of these tracks. But the reason why I'm really excited about audio to audio, and loads of people have been doing this. OpenAI has a product called Jukebox.
Okay.
Definitely check that out. It's really huge. I could go on for hours and hours singing the praises of Jukebox, because even though they do, as far as I understand, do audio to audio training, and my criticisms so hold of that, it's fantastic what it is.
And in what different way? I mean, if we're thinking,
it's very like Google.
Yeah,
if that's what you're going to ask.
In that, what we were discussing with Midjourney, for example, I think it's Midjourney. They have access to a number of libraries, and that's where they sort of take the, let's say, inspiration from. Whereas, of course, Polymuse is off its sound worlds. Surely things like Jukebox and Google's LM must have enough. If I think about what's out there openly and legally, that either is licensed or is not. Are you saying to me that if the only thing they've got available to sort of train on is SoundCloud, for example, then the stuff that's going to come out is going to be utter garbage, basically? Or there must be some sort of licensing pools out there, surely. Or am I barking up the wrong tree entirely?
No, you're barking up the right tree, and I think that's the hope that over the next few years, when you can persuade rights holders that it's a good thing to train AI algorithms on their catalogs. If you can persuade UMG, Warner, to just sign over their catalogs for training, they will do it. It's kind of precisely why we're doing what we're doing at the time that we're doing it, because you need copyright provenance ultimately, because there are all kinds of people who get onto a catalog, and the way the music industry is, it's going to be very difficult for someone who's just been signed to say, hey, that thing should have, why is this training, why isn't that thing like coming back to me somehow? Yeah.
Certainly in the age of, or sort of moving into the age of ownership as well. Specifically on blockchain. Have you got any sort of plans to integrate Polymuse into any sort of blockchain applications at all, or is it sort of purely AI for now?
Oh no, yeah. So we're very, very Web3 friendly, and there's something there is like a really, really cool development, but I unfortunately can't premiere it right now. there is something very big in Web3 that we're working on literally right now, to do with generative music. DJ Dance Club is essentially, they are building AI tools on top of Polymuse that completely, it's their thing that they run, that they do. It's just the underlying tech is Polymuse. That's going to be very decentralized.
Wow.
And precisely, it's the age of ownership. It's being able to work with music, truly own it, have a reason to actually sell it, and actually make things like licensing make a lot more sense.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Well, I think that about covers it. I have to say thank you very much, Ilya, for coming on to talk about Polymuse. Really, really exciting project that I probably don't give enough time to, but when I do, I have a lot of fun, and I'm very excited to see where it goes. So best of luck to you, and congratulations on what you've achieved so far, and that's to the team as well.
Oh, thanks. I'll definitely pass it on.
So anything to share? I mean, can people find you anywhere? Where do they find Polymuse? How do they sort of keep up to date with things?
So as I kind of mentioned, we are closing out the beta, but we're definitely. But if somebody really, really wants to test it, they can definitely get in contact with me or send us an email. You can find our website at delphos.ai, delphos.ai, and we've made it really, really simple, mainly due to my non-existent web design skills. But yeah, you just literally click Polymuse and then get in contact, and you can get in contact with us.
Very cool.
One thing that I definitely would love to plug here,
Yeah.
including to you actually. One thing that we really, really want to be doing loads of right now is creating sound worlds with other artists. So if anyone kind of likes and is inspired by what we did with techno and really any of the sound worlds, do get in contact with us, and we'll work together to make a sound world. And then whether that goes into a product in the future or into Polymuse as a consumer product or games in the future, do get in contact with us. We'll build it.
It's very, very exciting. All right.
And a CT20 sound world. Go on.
I can't imagine. Sounds like a lot of work. I think I'm going to say no. No, I would love to. I would love to. All right. Well, thank you very much. And the future of Polymuse, very exciting.
Oh, amazing. Right. Cheers.